Hello, how is everybody doing? Happy Monday. I just want to say that last week was amazing. As most of you know, I went on vacation. I actually went to Florida with a group of some of my friends from high school, and we just had such a good time. It was a definitely well needed and deserved break. It's been quite a while since I've actually really taken a vacation and went somewhere and got to relax. And we also had a lot of fun activities. One day we went parasailing, another we rented out a pontoon boat and we went to Crab Island, which is in Destin, Florida. And it's like a sandbar and it's like really clear water and you can swim around. A lot of people are there just hanging out. And instead of food trucks like normal, this is obviously water. They have food boats, legit, and it was just such a good time. We also played a lot of games, played video games, hung out. We went out to eat a few times, but there are also times that we cooked at home. And also we went to the beach. So, man, what a great time. I also got a little bit darker, so that's good. I told everyone that I'm trying to keep up with my husband. He's Hispanic, for those who don't know, so I don't think I'll ever achieve that, but I'm a little bit closer to his skin tone than where I was before I went on this trip, so that's pretty funny. So what else is new? I have some cool updates for you guys that are completely unrelated to the podcast, but are completely relevant to me and my life. So, of course, you know that I went on vacation because it was a break in between my summer semester and my fall semester. And while I was on vacation, I got my grades back. And I found out that I got all A's and a 4.0 GPA for the semester. So that is super exciting. I'm really proud of myself. And that means I'll be on both the chancellor's list and the dean's list. For me, I take pride in my studies and my work and everything that I do. You know, with my goal of wanting to be a mental health counselor, I have to go to graduate school once I graduate with my bachelor's. So I'm trying to get the best grades possible so that I can have a higher chance of getting accepted into my master's program. Other than that, Wednesday is my husband and I's 3rd anniversary. So that is really exciting. Kind of sucks that it's in the middle of the week, but we will find a way to celebrate as always. I also start the fall semester today. I'm taking 5 classes, so please pray for me if that's your thing. I'm keeping super busy, y'all, but that's kind of how I like things. But today we're going to get a little bit more serious. I kind of wasn't sure about what I wanted to talk about for this episode, and I asked for some suggestions and ideas, and I figured here we are on episode 6. I'm starting to get a little bit of a following, and so I'm going to share a little bit more about me in this episode, because today we're going to go over mood disorders. Ooh. I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. Alright, so let's jump in with some definitions because we gotta kind of know the background and what things mean. It'll just make the understanding of my explanation with these. So mood disorders. The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines mood disorder as a psychiatric condition in which the principal feature is a prolonged, pervasive emotional disturbance. So these are maladaptive disorders, which we've talked about before, meaning they intervene so much with your life that you're unable to function. That's what causes people to get diagnosed. The most common types of mood disorders that most of us recognize is depression and bipolar disorder. Now, these are kind of like an umbrella that have others underneath them that fall into their category. Kind of like how in episode 1 we talked about phobias and how it's under the umbrella of anxiety disorders. just to put things into perspective. Alright, so most of the information that I got for these disorders came from my textbooks in my intro to psychology class and my abnormal psychology class. I also did a little bit of research via the wonderful Google. I also dug into the DSM-5 a little bit, and that is pretty much a diagnostic manual for professional psychologists to be able to properly diagnose people with mental disorders. So first we're going to talk about depression. Now, depression is a low, sad state in which life seems dark and its challenges are overwhelming. It involves presence of course, sad, empty, or irritable mood, accompanied by somatic and cognitive changes that significantly affect the individual's capacity to function. Now, this is about 17% of the U.S. population. This is also the leading cause of disability worldwide, and it's more common in women. So guess what, men? You get a point. We're going to keep that up just as, like I said, it's kind of dark, but it's also a fun little challenge that we can have against each other, right? Unipolar depression, it's pretty much like normal depression. It kind of separates from bipolar, and we'll dive into that later, and you will probably better understand it then if you don't know much about either disorder. So unipolar depression has no history of mania, but you return to normal or nearly normal mood when the depression lifts. Now that is different in bipolar. With bipolar, they usually have depression, and then instead of returning to normal, they have a manic episode or described as mania. Now depressive symptoms, there's motivational, so they have a loss of desire to pursue usual activities. So there's a lack of drive, spontaneity, and initiative. Behavioral, they are less active, less productive. Cognitive, negative self-esteem, some pessimism, perform less when it comes to memory, attention, and reasoning. And then physical symptoms is their sleep and appetite can be affected. So when it comes to depression, most people, they suffer from multiple disorders, especially if they struggle with sleep as a physical symptom. So they may have some sort of insomnia along with their depression. They may also have anxiety along with depression. It really just depends on the person. Alright, so the first type of depression, it's called major depressive disorder. Now this is characterized by persistent sadness and other symptoms. There is major and severe symptoms for at least 2 weeks or more. They have prolonged and persistent periods of extreme sadness. Their emotions can consist of sad, hopelessness, guilt, irritability, anxiety, emptiness, loss of interest in things once enjoyed. They may have thoughts, so maybe trouble concentrating and making decisions, or even suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideations. Physical, so like their appetite and weight changes, unexplained aches and pains, insomnia or sleeping too much, fatigue. So with major depressive disorder, they display at least 5 symptoms. And usually they do this by, if you ever go to like a clinic, especially something for mental health, they'll give you like an assessment and you pretty much rate yourself on, has your appetite changed? How have your emotions been? Have you had any trauma within the last month? How your interest in activities has been? How has your relationships been and social interactions? Those kind of things. So that's how they're able to assess and diagnose their patients. I'm going to talk about major depressive disorder. This is something that I have been diagnosed with by a psychologist and have received treatment for, so I will share my firsthand knowledge and experience of it. But for now, we'll move on to the other categories under the depression umbrella, and I will share my experiences later on in this episode. Alright, so now the next one is called persistent depressive disorder. This is mildly depressed mood in which you experience symptoms of depression most days for at least 2 years. So it's a long-term chronic form of depression. and it displays at least 2 symptoms that I talked about earlier, but some of those can also consist of feeling helpless, poor self-esteem, reduced energy levels, sleeping problems, appetite problems. These are all types of things that consist in depression. The next one is depression related to medical illness. So this is a persistent depressed mood and a significant loss of pleasure in most or all activities that's directly related to the physical effects of another medical condition. So when I was first diagnosed with major depressive disorder, they asked a lot of questions about pain and injury and those type of things to see if it related. For me, I had plantar fasciitis, which is like a condition in your foot if you're very flat-footed, and it's like where the arch is, you get a lot of pain in your arch, and I've had to have 3 foot surgeries on my left foot for this condition. So when I was first diagnosed with depression, they asked me questions to see if it would relate to that at all, but they realized that it was a more severe, and it wasn't just related to medical illness. It wasn't just a loss of pleasure in being able to like walk or be able to run or be able to do physical things involved in my foot hurting. It was deeper than that. So that's kind of how they distinguish between the different types of depression. The next one is depression induced by substance use or medication. This is depression symptoms that develop during or soon after substance use or withdrawal or after exposure to a medication. Our book didn't really go into much detail, but when it comes to substance use and medications, depending on the type of medications or the type of drugs that you're using, they can affect the brain. So they can affect the biological causes of these conditions, such as depression. And so that explains how it can be induced by substance use or medication. Now the next one is called postpartum depression. Now this is a mental disorder anytime from pregnancy to a year after baby's birth. So in addition to other depression symptoms, excessive crying, withdrawing from family, difficulty bonding with the new baby, and feelings that a bad mother may accompany this. Now, I know quite a few people that have unfortunately suffered with postpartum depression, and a lot of them have said, we glorify, and there's nothing bad about glorifying being a mother and having a baby and having that moment of being able to first lay eyes on your child and bond with them. But those that have had postpartum depression, some have a different experience. They may look at their child and be just completely apathetic to the new baby instead of feeling that we normally get with like happiness and love and bonding. I know one lady that I used to work with that said she had such a hard time the first few weeks after having her son with bonding. Like, she knew that was her child. She knew she had to provide and care for him, but she just, I don't want to say didn't love him yet, but she just had such a hard time bonding. And she felt like she was such a bad mother for not feeling the same that other women feel. And eventually that postpartum depression lifted and she was able to bond. But this is a very unfortunate thing, and it can look different in different women. Also, with pregnancy, there's so many different hormones, so many body changes. Maybe your thought processes change. So, there's no shame in having postpartum depression. Some people, it's even more difficult because they may have a lack of support from family. I know I've seen that in a couple of other people. That can make it more difficult. So if you have a friend that you see signs in this, or you have experienced it or are experiencing it, don't feel bad for reaching out for help, because it's a normal thing. It's usually postpartum depression is more temporary versus other types of depression, which is a good thing for the person, because depression obviously is not fun. But, it definitely sucks when they're going through it. And the best thing that people can do for people with any type of depression is just being supportive, maybe asking what they need. Sometimes they don't really need anything. Sometimes they just want someone to talk to. For mothers, it might be having help with caring of the baby, letting them take a nap or something. So I'm not a mother. I just have a dog. And I always say I have my dog and my husband, my 2 kids. But this is something serious that should be talked about more. And I do hope to be a mother one day. So it's also good to be aware of these things and to maybe not expect them. But if you experience the symptoms, then you're like, okay, that's what it is. And maybe acknowledging that and then seeking help will help in recovery. All right, so the next one is called premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Now, before my psychology classes, a lot of these under the umbrella of depression, I had no idea were things. So it's kind of cool that I learned, especially about this one. Now, this is more severe than PMS, and PMS is premenstrual syndrome. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder. The symptoms of this condition include mood swings, irritability, and other signs of depression, along with cramps, bloating, pain, and headaches. The symptoms, they start about a week to 10 days before menstrual cycle and goes away after it begins. So the mood changes and irritability that occur during the premenstrual phase of a woman's cycle, they go away with the onset of menses. So usually this occurs during the week before menses, before you start your menstrual cycle. So I don't know any women that have experienced that, but then again, your hormones are changing before you start your period and right after. So that could be a cause of this. All right, so there's also seasonal affective disorder, and ironically, the abbreviation is SAD. So this is a form of depression most often associated with fewer hours of daylight in the far northern and southern latitudes from late fall to early spring. So this is when your mood changes with seasons. So I actually had a friend that was stationed, I believe, in Alaska, that I guess because they weren't really close to anyone there and were in a pretty remote location and didn't have a lot of friends around. And with the fewer hours of daylight during the winter time in Alaska, it's pretty much dark all the time. And I think this really affected them. So I don't think they were diagnosed, but they very well could have had seasonal affective disorder when they were up there. Okay, now we're going to talk about disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Now, this is actually a disorder of chronic, severe, and persistent irritability in children that often includes frequent temper outbursts that are inconsistent with the child's development age. I didn't get much on what causes this in the book, but there could probably be many things. It could be parenting style, the way parents discipline their children, if there's trauma or abuse in the home. It could very well be biological. So I didn't really get too deep into that one, but that is something to be aware of if you do have children and you notice different signs and symptoms. And if this is something that you guys want me to get more into, let me know. Because I think at one point I will talk more about like child development and things like that. So now what causes depression? So we've talked about this a little bit before in other episodes when I've talked about neurotransmitters and stuff like that. But the biological factors, it can be hereditary. There can be an abnormality of the 5-HTT gene, which is located on chromosome 17, and that affects the activity of the neurotransmitter for serotonin. It's crazy how much they've been able to discover about how different things in the body affect everything else. Also, there's a 50% concordance rate for identical twins. Depression can be caused by a scarce number of norepinephrine and serotonin. Now, during depression, the brain activity does slow down, and the left frontal lobe can be less active. Now, the cognitive causes of depression, it can be a negative self and worldview, self-defending beliefs. There's also rumination, and that is actually a deep or considered thought about something. So the action or process of thinking deeply about something. This could also be letting that negative self or negative worldview spiraling down, kind of like a slippery slope. The biological treatments for this, there's electroconvulsive therapy, or known as ECT. This is like 2 electrodes attached to the patient's head to cause a brain seizure. I don't think they practice this much anymore because now we have medications that actually work better, and we have other type of therapies that work better than causing your brain to have a seizure. Of course, there's antidepressant medications. There are also behavioral cognitive treatments. I combine these together because usually they are together in most treatments. This can include changing behaviors, giving yourself grace, changing thought patterns, evaluating your thoughts. One thing in my therapy we've called NATs, kind of like the bug, negative automatic thoughts, and knowing how to combat those. So now's the time where I'm going to kind of talk about my experience a little bit. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder along with generalized anxiety disorder and insomnia when I was in the military. It was, I think it was a year before I actually separated, but I have been suffering for quite a while before that. While I was in the military, I had issues with leadership. There were times where I had really bad leadership that didn't really care, that they were just petty, and it's like you were constantly under a microscope. They were constantly looking for things that you did wrong, and it's like they didn't appreciate you or your efforts. Like, that's the kind of environment that I was in, and I don't know if that's what caused this. I honestly don't know. I think for me, I've probably had depression for a long time. I just didn't really realize it and know what it was. I thought it was just normal. But things started to get worse, where I started to have suicidal ideations and thoughts. And from there, I was lucky enough to get out of where I was. I was still stationed at the same base, but I got moved units. And at that time, I had amazing leadership, and I think it really helped me a lot in my recovery because, man, before it was just awful. And the thing is, I already thought negative thoughts about myself. And just having those constantly thrown at you by others, like that's all you felt all the time, not only internally, but externally. People made you feel like it didn't matter if you tried your hardest, like you're just still a failure, and that's kind of how it was. It definitely didn't help. But when I got moved, it was a completely different environment. At that time, I promoted, and the leadership I had, they were very confident in me. They gave me the room to grow. They gave me the confidence that I needed. They gave me the flexibility to not really make mistakes, because I didn't really make many mistakes because they weren't so much pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself, but it wasn't the external pressure. And I was just able to thrive in that environment. I was able to head start a lot of programs. I was able to really get into the role of my new position and make things better for the unit that I was in. And the leadership I had, they saw the good in me. They encouraged me. Even if I had like a setback or if I had some type of issue, they would always come at me. And it was just a different way than what I knew before, where it was more of they would address the issue with me and kind of like see where I went from there and give me the room to grow, instead of just constantly harping on me and constantly making me feel horrible about myself. I eventually got to a point where at my job, I was happier. I was doing so much better. But my symptoms of depression were still there, and they came and went. And I was getting close to separation. I was at a time where things were changing. And I don't know, like my husband and I, we were kind of newly married, so we were figuring out the whole marriage thing. We did not live together before being married. There were a lot of things that we had to work out and figure out with each other and get into a better rhythm. And I just think that I constantly still had those negative thoughts. And it also didn't help that I did have surgery. After post-surgery, there were a lot of times where I couldn't do much activity. So I also gained a lot of weight. And that really just put even more of negative self-esteem. And then I would have people pointed out, which it's kind of a cultural thing. It's known for my family, but there would be people that are associated with my husband's family that would do that, or that they would make some slight comment or say something to my husband or say something to me. And honestly, it's just really rude. I don't know why people even do that, but I kind of think that that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother disorder, like narcissism or even sadism, where they like to see people hurt. But anyway, even though I was kind of in a better place, I knew I was still suffering and that I had to get help. And so at this point, I actually talked to my leadership and I let them know like what was going on with me. I didn't go into too much detail, but I let them know like, hey, I'm just not okay mentally and I'm going to seek help. And at this point in my career and in the point of the Department of Defense, we had a lot of military members commit suicide. And it became a thing of now it's being more talked about. People are being more self-aware and aware of those around them and to look out for different signs and symptoms. And at this point, I was just like, I really need help. Things are getting better at work. Things are getting better at home. But I'm still having these symptoms. And I just didn't understand like what was causing things. And what was causing my thought patterns, what was causing some of my behaviors, like having trouble with sleep, having constant negative thoughts, even going so far as having suicidal thoughts. I never really had an issue with appetite, but I tended to overeat when I was bored. And sometimes when I was depressed, I would tend to eat more. I also lost a lot of desire to keep up with friendships or to do activities. Sometimes I would kind of talk out of going to do something because I just didn't feel up for it. And I also had like a lack of drive and initiative when I was in this mood, and I was less productive. But when I was more normal, I was very productive. I could get things done, but when I was in this depression state, I just couldn't. So at that time, I started going on base, and I was diagnosed. I started on medication. I was actually on a serotonin type of medication called Zoloft, and it didn't really work. And now I'm on duloxetine, which is like Cymbalta, and it's a combination of serotonin and norepinephrine, and it's been working. I did have one setback with it, but I'll get more into that. Now, when I was going on base, it was great. I had a great psychologist. But then the problem is that I was separating from the Air Force. And instead of just separating straight out, they have a program where you can do an internship before you separate to get some experience. And I actually did a human resources internship because I kind of thought that's what I wanted to pursue because that was my job in the military. It was a great company. There were a lot of wonderful people there. In the short time that I was there, I got to know different people, and I really enjoyed that part. I was really passionate about what the company did, but I just did not like how different HR was in the civilian side. I also didn't have the best manager either, like the best supervisor. It was kind of like bringing me back to the times where I was in the Air Force and didn't have the best leadership. It was kind of like that, and that affected how I felt as well. But the biggest thing was how different it was. In the military, they expect you to pretty much know everything. They expect you to know all the regulations, or at least know where to look to find the information to help people. And if not, referring them to people that know a lot more. Now, what's so different on the civilian side, it's like they have departments like we do in the military. But say you walk into like the office where the benefits person is sitting along with like the leave person, and the benefit person isn't there. And so it's pretty much like, well, sorry, you'll have to wait till they come back. And for me, I just didn't like that. And the fact that if you wanted to try to help them, you'd be kind of stepping on the toes of the benefits person in a way. Like, I don't know, for me, it just was not what I was used to. I didn't like the way things were ran. And with this company being so great, it's like, well, if their HR is like this, then how is HR going to be like in other companies that aren't as well established or like number one in their industry? So that really turned me off. And at this point, I was still going on base for therapy, but it was kind of limited because of the internship and things. And then I separated from the military. And at this time, COVID was also starting to hit. And so things got really, really bad for me. For the longest time, I didn't have a psychologist with the VA. Once I was fully separated, then I got my rating and everything. And then I was able to set up everything, but I had to wait a little bit to be able to set things up. And then you have to establish rapport with who you're speaking with. And I had great people at the VA. I still do. I still have therapy. And they've helped me a lot. Now, when I separated from the military, it was April of last year. At this point, I was pretty established in the VA care system. And it was August at this point, which is very nostalgic because this was only last year for me. And my husband and I, we went out early for dinner to celebrate our anniversary. I don't remember if we had Chipotle or Panera or Texas Roadhouse, whatever. We went out to eat to enjoy each other's company and everything. And so when we got back to our tiny apartment at the time, we pulled up and we parked. And then there was this man that came up to us and started to threaten us. And he was bickering about our cars and how we parked them on the street. Because our apartment, we had apartment parking, but it was known for thieves. And I mean, there was even one time where someone took all 4 tires off of my husband's Jeep. They would steal tools. They would break into people's cars. It was ridiculous. So we would always park on the street to avoid that. Like I said, it's a public street. Anyone is allowed to park as long as you don't park in the no parking areas or whatever. And so this guy confronts us about us parking there. And because we have multiple vehicles, we would park them all on the street to avoid thieves and whatnot. And this guy was just going off on us and being so confrontational about the vehicles. And him and my husband, they pretty much got into it. And I felt like I was stuck in a place where I wanted to leave and go inside because I was getting really stressed out. I was getting really anxious. And I kept telling them I was going to have an anxiety attack, but they wouldn't listen to me. They both just kept yelling back at each other. And I also felt like if I went inside, I don't know what this guy is capable of. And I don't want to leave my husband out there. Like, if something were to happen, at least they have a witness. I mean, this guy, he was just awful. And then the guy tried to pull race into it. And I don't know, it just kind of grew from there. This guy is black and my husband is like, I don't care if you're black, white, green, whatever. And I'm Hispanic. So, like, race does not matter. Like, you're confronting us and being confrontational about our cars. And it was something so petty and so stupid. Like, the guy could have just simply came up to us and say, hey, I've noticed that you guys park here a lot and my apartment is on this street and I would like to have an open spot to where I can park. Like, simply, he could have just been nice about it, but he wasn't. It's like he came out guns blazing, being very rude to us. And so an argument happened between them. It just kept getting more heated. I was getting more and more anxious, nervous. I just didn't want to be there. And I told them, like, guys, I'm going to have anxiety attack. And they kept talking and they kept bickering, and I don't know, it was just like this dude started threatening us. The good thing is we were in the process of home searching, so we were about to hopefully move, but it was just awful. And I actually did have a really bad anxiety attack where the guy actually left, and it's like he didn't even care that I was having this issue. He just didn't give a crap. And I think at that time, my husband, he just didn't understand depression. I mean, honestly, I don't think he still understands. But he understands more now and he's more aware. But at this time, it was just I had anxiety disorder and the depression. And I had the anxiety attack and he wanted me to come inside and I literally just could not move. And we're going to talk about anxiety later on in another episode, but if you suffer with anxiety attacks or panic attacks, they're kind of the same but different. And I couldn't move because then the depression was taking over. I didn't want to move. I was just crying. I didn't understand the state of mind that I was in. And I sat outside for a long time. And then my husband brought out the chief editor, my dog Augie, to kind of comfort me. And then I finally made my way to the apartment and sat on the steps. And my husband came out and was like, come on, get inside. And he helped me get get inside, and then we had like an argument, and it got really bad. It was just, I think he didn't understand my state of mind. Frankly, I didn't understand it either. And it's not like he was being insensitive. I think he just didn't understand what was going on with me. And so he's like, why are you acting like this? What's going on with you? And at that point, I kind of just wanted to be left alone or just wanted to be comforted. I didn't want to be confronted because that's what we were dealing with the whole night. And that's kind of how it was. And I don't even know at what point it was, but I remember just laying in our bed crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And him coming in there like, you've been crying for like 2 hours. Something must be really wrong with what's going on. He just didn't know what to do at that point. And everything is kind of a blur. And I just remember telling him that I didn't want to be here anymore. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I don't want to be in this apartment either. I know it sucks. I know the people around here suck, but we're going to be out of here soon. And I was like, no, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be on Earth. I'm having these thoughts. And in the past, when I've had them, I've been able to control them. I've been able to stop them. I've been able to distract myself or talk to a friend or defer myself. And I was just in such a bad state of mind where I couldn't get out of that loop of thoughts and of thinking. And so at that point, my husband's like, okay, I'm taking you to the emergency room. And luckily, we lived really close to the VA. And because my husband wasn't really understanding what was going on with me, I took it as, well, he must not love me. He must not want to be with me because of like what's going on with me and how I'm thinking. And it was just a spiral of what I was thinking at the time, which were completely not correct. And so I remember when we arrived at the VA, at the emergency room, I was just crying. I could barely talk. The woman was like, what the heck, like, is going on? And I told her, like, I'm having an anxiety attack. I don't know what to do. This has lasted for, an hour. I just can't. And so they finally took me back, and it was just kind of awful at first. The emergency staff were not the best. They were quite awful. So I was trying to calm myself down. One nurse came in. She's like, remember your breathing techniques. She kind of talked me through it a little bit, but she was also very rough with me. I don't know. And then I was such in a state of mind where I couldn't process what was going on. And I think one of them asked me, like, if I wanted to kill myself. And like I said, no, because it wasn't that I wanted to kill myself. It's just that I didn't want to be there. Like, I was thinking about suicide, but I didn't want to commit it, And so I guess I misinterpreted the question or something. And then another male nurse came in. He was probably like the worst. He was just very rough and very just horrible. And he asked me the same thing. I was like, well, I'm not thinking about committing suicide, but I'm thinking about suicide. I don't want to be here, like, want to be dead kind of thing. He's like, well, that's pretty much the same thing, and you lied to us, blah, blah, blah. And he was just a complete butthole. And at that point, they shoved a Q-tip down my nose, because at that time, COVID was a thing. That was awful. And then, finally, there was a social worker that came in, and I was able to calm down and talk to her a bit. She was a godsend, I swear. But I kind of wish she would have came earlier because I feel like I was not treated right at all by the medical staff in the emergency department. They were just horrible. I don't know. Like, it's really bad to think that if I ever have something else like this happen to me, would I even want to go to the emergency room? Probably not. And that's scary because if you do have suicidal thoughts or ideations, it's like, who do you turn to at that point? I get my care through the VA. Why would I want to go to the emergency room when I was treated so horribly the first time? And I feel like a lot of people with mental health probably go through that as well. Well, I was admitted to the mental health unit, and that first night was really, really horrible. I couldn't sleep. You can't really sleep because they have the lights on and they come in, they check every 15 minutes because you have people with all kinds of mental disorders there. You don't know what you're going to get. That first day was really rough. Once I woke up, I was just in such a depressed mood. You have a lot of evaluations with doctors to see where you're at, to see what you're thinking, what happened while you're there. You have to tell your story over and over again. And it's hard when things are a blur. They have like group therapies. They have a time where you play games like Monopoly. You can kind of watch movies together. But you also have like breakout sessions where you do group therapy. You talk to a psychologist. You talk to a psychiatrist. They check your vitals, all of these things. You have food, which one thing I will say about the VA, their food is pretty good. Their food is pretty bomb. So that is one compliment I will give. Their mental health staff was amazing. I will say that. Everyone from their social worker to the nurses to the psychiatrist, the doctors, the chaplain that was there. There was a woman that would come there and play games with us, and I can't even remember what her position was, but that part was pretty good. After day 1, I did get to make calls to my husband. That was like the day before our anniversary, the 24th. And so the 25th rolls around and it's our anniversary and I'm stuck in, I had joked that it's like the psych ward, which was awful. And I was still contemplating these same thoughts that I was having and the thoughts that maybe my husband had of me because he never seen me in that state ever. And I think he was confused about what the heck was going on with me. He just didn't understand. He never dealt with mental health ever. So it was really rough, but on our anniversary, he did come and visit. We had a good 30 minutes to just kind of sit and talk things through. And he reassured me that things were going to be okay. He's there for me. He's going to try to understand what all of this is about. And even I think the doctors actually or nurses talked to him as well about my conditions and tried to help him understand a little bit more, because I don't think he understood how severe I was suffering and how deep my conditions went. I think that really helped too, because once I got out, we were able to talk more. He was able to protect me more from, I guess, myself and my thoughts, and reassuring me of how he felt about me. And he was able to keep me safe and kind of keep his eye out for how I was. Now, the first day I did get out, he did come get me. We spent a little time together, but he did have to go to work. And I was not ready to be alone yet. So I actually called a friend who is still a chaplain at my base. And shout out to them. Him and his wife, they were the first people that knew about what happened, because I was just very ashamed of it. For the longest time, I was very ashamed of my mental health and everything. And they were the first people I called that knew about it besides my husband, because I knew they would understand. They've always been amazing, the chaplain and his wife, his family. And so I went over to their house and just kind of hung out with them and their kids. And then we actually went to a Bible study right after, and it just really helped me. And I was able to go home that night and be alone and be perfectly safe and be perfectly content in my thoughts and everything. And I thank God for them, because it was an incredible rescue that I kind of needed. And it's something so small, but they didn't even have to ask me questions or judge me. They were just kind of like, you can talk if you want to talk. You don't have to, but you're here, and that's all that matters. So for the longest time, I was ashamed of my mental health and the things I was going through. And after that happened, they upped my dosage and medication, and honestly, that significantly helped. And I was in therapy more often, and a lot of the tools that they gave me just helped me so much. And I have an incredible team at the VA that I talk to. So yeah, it's been a long process, and I've had to learn to give myself grace on the days where I am depressed and I don't want to do anything and I just want to sit in front of the TV, or I'm just not motivated. I've learned to give myself grace and give myself that day, and then the next day be like, okay, whether you're feeling depressed or not, you need to get up and move around. You need to start doing some homework, even if it's just a little bit here and there, to kind of get my feet back into it. I've had to learn to look at myself differently. I've had to evaluate my own thinking patterns. There's a lot of work that goes into it when you have a mental health issue. They make it out to where it's so easy, just do some therapy and take some meds and it's good. I mean, the meds help, but depending on the cause, you have to work on the cognitive and the behavioral stuff as well. And for me, I couldn't do the behavior and cognitive stuff because I was so stuck and depressed all the time. And so the meds kind of helped me get out of that rut and be able to start changing my thinking and changing my behaviors and to be more motivated and to really take charge of my treatment, my recovery, and my life. So ever since then, things have been pretty good. I still have my ups and downs. I still have my episodes. I've never been in that bad of a state. I used to have depression almost every single day, and it was a real struggle. And then once I really started to take charge, get on the new meds, get into therapy, and get more involved, then I only had depressive symptoms 2 days a week instead of 4 or 5. And now it's to where I may have it once a week or every other week, or sometimes it might be a few days a week and then I'll go a couple weeks being perfectly fine. But pretty much it's not as constant as it used to be. And I think it's from giving myself grace, taking charge of things, changing some of my behaviors, trying to evaluate and change some of my thought patterns. But it is hard. It's a lot of work. And if you don't tackle it, it can get to that slippery slope of you wind up in the psych ward. What I'm trying to say is don't be ashamed of getting help. Don't be ashamed of acknowledging that you have a problem, because there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people try to make us feel weak for, oh, you have a mental disorder or you have things wrong with you, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, especially if you have a mental disorder, I feel like it's 2 times even harder to get help, to ask for help. It just is, because depending on your symptoms, you may be unmotivated. You may be laying in bed where you don't want to move. You may have no energy. But sometimes we don't even acknowledge what's wrong with us. And sometimes we have people around us that see things and they just let it happen, or they just don't care enough to really say something. But don't be ashamed. Get help if you need help. And don't feel like it's a weakness. Really, it's honestly a strength to ask for help, because you're putting yourself in the position of being in need, and that's really hard to do. Because us as humans, we typically want to feel like we're strong, like people need us, like we can take care of things. But when you're in the position of asking for help and acknowledging that you need help, that takes Superman to do that. Alright, so my story, I'm not as ashamed as I used to be, and so you shouldn't be either. I know it can be hard at first, and it may not be the same for you, but for me, being able to share my story and possibly give hope to others and maybe be an example that people can overcome or at least manage their symptoms, that's the ultimate goal. And to help with the stigma on mental health. So that's my life goals. Okie dokie. So now we're going to talk about bipolar disorder. Give you a little, I guess, a slight lift up or more information versus listening to your favorite podcaster talk about their own struggles. Now, bipolar disorder and depression are different in a way. Bipolar disorder, they have depressive episodes with any of the depression signs that usually alternate with manic or hypomaniac symptoms. And this is also called manic depression or bipolar affective disorder. And like I said, it's depression that includes alternate times of depression and mania. So, aka like hopelessness and lethargy of depression, and maybe an overly excited state of mania. So they show both signs of depression and manic. And a full manic episode, it's at least a week long. Now, I keep saying manic and mania, and maybe some of you are like, what is that? And I'm going to explain it. So, mania, it's like a state of euphoria, or at least frenzied energy in which an exaggerated belief that the world is theirs for the taking. So they can be hyperactive, widely optimistic, in which they make dangerously poor judgment. That can be a common thing. Some manic symptoms do include their emotions, so they could be upbeat, wired, expansive, euphoric. Their thoughts could be grandiose or racing thoughts, distractibility, excessive self-confidence, lack of judgment, extreme risk-taking. And then physically, they could have increased energy or agitation, needing less sleep or food. Now, those with bipolar disorder, it is diagnosed for less than 1% of the US population. Now, there are 3 different types that I have here. Now, bipolar 1 disorder, it's when they have full manic and major depressive episodes. So most experience an alternation of episodes, meaning 1 week. We'll just use a week as a standard, just because it's easier to measure. Say they'll have a full week of depressive episodes and depressive symptoms, and then the next week they'll be having manic symptoms, manic episodes. Now, however, some with bipolar 1 disorder may have mixed features which showcase both within the same episode. So this could be like, say, those 2 weeks, instead of them alternating, they could have both. Maybe one moment they could be really depressed, and then the next they're like manic. So it really depends on the person. Now, bipolar 2 disorder, this is what they call hypomanic, and it's mildly manic episodes that do alternate with major depressive episodes. So bipolar 1 is kind of a mix. They can either alternate or have a mix of them, but bipolar 2 is they have mildly manic episodes and they do alternate. There's no mixing, really. There's also cyclothymic disorder, and this is numerous periods of hypomanic symptoms and mild depression. This is less severe than bipolar, but it's still kind of under the bipolar umbrella. So their symptoms are less severe, but they still have those periods, and it may not be a constant thing. But now, biological factors: overactivity of norepinephrine and or their ion activity. It could be hereditary. They could have a genetic predisposition. There's actually 70% concordance rate for identical twins. And then biological treatments is taking mood stabilizers like lithium and antipolar drugs. Now, what is so crazy about this is in depression, it's having a lack of serotonin or a lack of norepinephrine. But in bipolar, it's having either an overactivity of norepinephrine or the ion activity, in the way that the ions react and interact with each other can cause this. So that's kind of crazy how the same neurotransmitter, depending on the sparsity or the overactivity, can cause different disorders. So in an earlier episode, it was actually the phobia episode where I used Shameless as an example. And I did give a fair warning that the show is very vulgar, so you don't have to really watch it. I will post videos to show examples of what that condition looks like. And a warning here is that there is a lot of language, so just a warning there. Now, with this show, there's a bunch of kids, essentially they're kids that live together, and both of their parents are pretty much crap parents. But the mother, she comes and goes. She's not really around ever. In one of the videos, it portrays when she comes back, and she does have bipolar disorder, and you can tell by her symptoms. Now, one of the kids, his name is Ian, and he shows the same symptoms. And so, in their case, it's probably hereditary, because it's the mom and the son. So I will post those so you can see an example of not only just bipolar, but also depression, because some of the videos display that pretty well, like them not wanting to get out of bed. And that's very much can be the state of mind for those that are depressed. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope you learned a little bit more about me. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And I hope that this was very informative. I do know that I got a request to go over bipolar disorder and even depression so that more people can understand it. I was kind of waiting a little bit to get more comfortable with this whole podcast thing before I opened up more and shared my own story, but I felt like now is the good time to do it. Since I'm getting a lot of good feedback and I'm getting a lot of support, I feel more confident in sharing. So you're welcome, or you're not welcome if you didn't want to hear it, but you're still here listening, right? Don't forget that you can follow the Facebook page at WT Psychology. I actually now have a group also called What the Psychology that you can join. I am luckily getting some more interaction in there, so anyone that's part of the group, feel free to interact, feel free to post, feel free to share if you'd like, feel free to make suggestions. I finally got the stickers to come in. I got those ordered and they're in, so if anyone wants a sticker, please let me know. You can also email at wtpsychology@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, so feel free to give us a follow, a like, a share, spread the word. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology. Stay psyched, y'all.